But I cannot overstate how dangerous 61 would be. It won't simply put my human rights, civil rights, and religious freedom in grave jeopardy, and those of all followers of Jesus, Yeshua in Hebrew. It could very well trigger an outright civil war here in Israel. Over the weekend, an estimated 600,000 Israelis poured into the streets to protest the current version of the judicial reform legislation barreling its way through the Knesset. People fear that the bill would emasculate the Supreme Court and prevent it from being a proper check and balance on the legislature and the government, and could spell the end to Israeli democracy. Defense Minister Yoav Gallant delivered a speech on live television Saturday night, urging Prime Minister Netanyahu to hit the pause button on the legislation. Why? To ratchet down tensions as Israelis enter the Passover, Easter, and Ramadan holidays. Gallant warned that the IDF is being pushed to the brink of combat ineffectiveness. Why? Because so many soldiers and fighter pilots are threatening not to report to their units if Netanyahu is perceived as jamming through this legislation. But Netanyahu refused to listen. Instead, on Sunday, Netanyahu fired Gallant. That was a mistake. By firing his defense minister, Netanyahu poured fuel on the fire. Many Israelis became frightened that Netanyahu wasn't going to listen to any outside discussion within the country, and would force the legislation through without allowing for any amendments. So, on Monday, the protests escalated dramatically, as we reported on All Israel News. Workers at Ben Gurion International Airport went on strike, forcing the airport to shut down. Israel's commercial ports shut down. All of Israelis' public schools and universities shut down. So did the banks. All McDonald's restaurants. Now that was a Big Mac crisis. 100,000 protesters surrounded the Knesset building. Protesters cut off major highways. Israeli President Isaac Herzog pleaded with Netanyahu to halt the bill and enter talks with opposition leaders to find a way out of the crisis. So did 5 members of Netanyahu's own Likud party. So did opposition leader Yair Lapid and former defense minister Benny Gantz. So did President Biden. I'll get to him later. Even Netanyahu's personal lawyer, advising him during his corruption trial, threatened to quit unless he agreed to hit the pause button. Now, as the crisis engulfed the entire country, people flooded the streets, and they feared that this protest movement could explode with violence. Meanwhile, the religious Zionism party, led by extreme right-wing Knesset members Bezalel Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir, threatened to bring Netanyahu's government down if he paused the legislative process. But by late Monday afternoon, Bibi had made his move. He informed his coalition partners that for the sake of the country, he had to hit the pause button and begin real talks with the opposition. Netanyahu then addressed the nation, explaining that he would not let the country enter, his words, civil war. I immediately wrote a column for All Israel News saying, thank God that Bibi has finally listened to the people, called the bluff of the religious Zionism party, and demonstrated true leadership. He should have done it sooner, let's be honest. By waiting so long, he has lost a great deal of national trust. His poll numbers are plunging. Still, just like last week when Bibi moved decisively and courageously to stop the anti-gospel bill of several ultra-Orthodox members of his government, Bibi was moving again decisively, and I would say courageously, and I'm grateful. I'm also grateful to President Isaac Herzog, Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, and former Defense Minister Benny Gantz. Why? Because they have courageously been urging Bibi to dial down the flames and seek a reasonable compromise, and they've been right to do so. In fact, Gantz's poll numbers are soaring. Israelis increasingly see him as a sensible leader who could help navigate Israel out of this crisis and avert civil war. So keep your eye on Benny Gantz. Now, in the midst of all this crisis, I sat down with Hanania Naftali. He's an advisor to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu for the last 5 years. Let's look at my conversation with him. This weekend, there were some estimates there were 600,000 people on the streets all around the country. Certainly in Tel Aviv, it was around 250,000 people protesting the judicial reform plan that the prime minister and his team are advancing. Now, that there are people in the country, certainly in the opposition, who want him out anyway. So this is just one issue. But there are people on the center right, people that are supportive of the prime minister, who are nervous that that this could lead to the end of democracy. Why do people say it? Real quickly, I think it's the main thing is this override clause in which, yes, any Supreme Court, any legislature needs to be able to have the people be able to say, no, that decision by the court was wrong, it was unfair, it was unjust, and a bunch of people in robes shouldn't be able to make every decision. Ultimately, the people get to decide. But when it's only 61 seats, which means one more than a majority here, that's what's got people nervous. Like, wait a minute, if it only takes one more seat than a majority to overturn a Supreme Court decision, then there is no Supreme Court. Right. And so even now, the defense minister, Gallant, who, is a strong supporter of the prime minister, part of the government, not an opposition guy. He's saying, whoa, we need to slow it down a little bit. And we need to build a compromise so that there's national buy-in from as broad a population as possible. But yes, Christians around the world that are paying any attention at all, they are concerned. Give us a short answer to how does the prime minister want people to see it?
Speaking from my opinion, I think that, of course, judicial reform is crucial. And if we, again, look back in history, Prime Minister Netanyahu was a champion of democracy and liberalism. He took pride in the fact that Israel is a beacon of liberalism, democracy, true democracy and true liberalism in the Middle East. So obviously he supports democracy. Protesting is a God-given right. Everyone has the right to do so. But in my opinion, judicial reform is crucial.
I agree with you. We absolutely need reforms. The only part of the reforms that I am particularly concerned about, and I think many who are supportive of the prime minister but are nervous, is this override clause. We need the clause, but maybe it should be 70 or 80 seats, not 61. It shouldn't be easy to overturn a Supreme Court decision. So how do you and the prime minister respond to those anxieties of all this massive protest movement?
Again, in my opinion, I think that judicial reform is crucial for the sake of Israel. And I trust Prime Minister Netanyahu that he knows best what's good for this country. But I have to say that what pains me, however, on a personal level, is to see lack of unity and this growing hatred amongst each other. Because I think that, let us not forget that it is because of lack of unity that the Second Temple was destroyed. And it is because we hated one another that foreign armies had invaded the Holy Land and subjugated our people. So we need to keep that in mind. And I wish, for unity to be restored, because we are stronger when we are united, and Israel is stronger when it is united. We see Iran and all the enemies, Hezbollah, Hamas, they're looking at what's happening in Israel, and they're happy to see that we fight amongst each other.
It's a house divided right now. Yeah.
And it's not good. I think that judicial reform is important, and we need to explain to people, on a personal level, that it's something that's good for democracy. It's not anti-democracy, it's pro-democracy.
And I will say, again, Netanyahu's decision to protect freedom of religion, freedom of conscience, freedom of worship, the human rights, that was, to me, last week was a good signal of his instincts, even against some members of his own coalition. And I would say that his speech the other night saying, okay, maybe it doesn't have to be 61, let's work on a compromise. Those are good signals. I want to show you something that you're not going to see on any other network. The full address that Prime Minister Netanyahu delivered to the nation of Israel Monday night, explaining why he's so concerned that Israel is on the brink of a civil war and why he decided to hit the pause button on the judicial reform bill and open up talks with the opposition. His remarks run about 8 minutes, and they will really help you understand just how serious this crisis really is.
Citizens of Israel, 3,000 years ago, here in Jerusalem, the judgment of Solomon took place. 2 women came before King Solomon. Each one claimed that she was the real mother of the infant. King Solomon commanded that a sword be brought and that the baby be cut in half. One woman was prepared to rend the baby in two, while the other woman absolutely refused and insisted that the infant stay alive and whole. Today, as well, both sides in the national controversy claim to love the infant, to love our country. I am aware of the enormous tension that is building between the two sides, between two parts of the nation, and I am attentive to the desire of many citizens to dispel this tension. However, there is one thing that I cannot accept. There is an extremist minority that is prepared to tear our country to pieces. It is using violence and incitement. It is threatening to harm elected officials. It is stoking civil war, and it is calling for refusal to serve, which is a terrible crime. The State of Israel cannot exist without the IDF, and the IDF cannot exist with refusal to serve. Refusal to serve by one side will lead to refusal to serve by the other. Refusal to serve is the end of our country. Therefore, I demand that the heads of the security services and of the Army vigorously oppose the phenomenon of refusal to serve, not to contain it, not to understand it, not to accept it, but to put a stop to it. Those who call for refusal to serve, those who call for anarchy and violence, are knowingly cutting the baby in two. But the overwhelming majority of Israeli citizens on both sides of the divide do not want to rend the infant. They are unwilling to cut the nation in two. Citizens of Israel, I am unwilling to cut the nation in two. For 3 months, I have repeatedly called for dialogue and also said that I would leave no stone unturned to find a solution because we remember, that we are not facing enemies but our brothers. I say here and now, there can be no civil war. Israeli society is on a dangerous collision course. We are in the midst of a crisis that is endangering the basic unity between us. This crisis requires all of us to act responsibly. Yesterday I read Benny Gantz's letter in which he promised, in good faith, to enter into a dialogue on all issues. I know that there are additional people who support his approach. To them I extend my hand, and I do so after having received the consent of most of my colleagues. When there is a chance to prevent civil war through dialogue, I, as Prime Minister, will take a timeout for dialogue. I will give a genuine chance for genuine dialogue. We insist on the need to enact the necessary changes in the judicial system, and we will give a chance to achieving broad consensus. This is an incomparably worthwhile goal. Therefore, out of national responsibility, out of a desire to prevent a rift in the nation, I have decided to suspend the second and third readings of the law in the current Knesset session in order to allow time to try and reach that broad consensus ahead of legislation in the next Knesset session. One way or another, we will enact a reform that will restore the balance between the authorities that has been lost by preserving, and I add, even by strengthening individual rights. From here, I would like to appeal to the supporters of the national camp. We have the Knesset majority to do this alone. with immense support among the people. Many of our supporters came to Jerusalem this evening in order to support the reform, to say, we need change, we need reform. I would like to say to you, I am proud of you. You are not second-class citizens. I appreciate that you turned out today in the streets of our capital in order to make our democratic voice heard. Nobody will silence your voice, our voice. I must say something else. You came spontaneously, unorganized and unfinanced, not pushed by the media, with all your heart and with all your soul. You have touched me. I only ask of you one thing. Continue to act responsibly and do not be dragged into any provocation. Our path is just. Today, the great majority of the public recognizes the urgency of democratic reform of the judicial system.
Usually, when Christians pray for the peace of Jerusalem, we're praying for God to protect Israel from our external enemies. Right now, we as evangelicals need to pray urgently for God to protect Israelis from civil war. Look, we're a long way from seeing this conflict resolved. The protests are continuing, and Netanyahu's allies in the Knesset on Tuesday actually tabled the current version of the legislation. That's a technical term, and it means that they are getting the original bill with its dangerous override clause of only 61 seats ready for final fast-track passage within 24 hours of a Netanyahu decision to call for a final vote. Opposition members are crying foul. They say the move shows that Netanyahu and his team are not serious about holding good faith talks and forging a compromise bill. Let's pray that's not the case and that it's just a bargaining tactic. The talks between the Netanyahu team and the opposition have already started under the leadership of President Herzog, who I have to say is proving to be an impressive peacemaker through all of this. And I'm praying that the talks do not break down, but are truly fruitful. Look, I'm going to put my cards on the table. I believe that judicial reforms are vitally important for the future of Israeli democracy, as I've argued repeatedly and at length and in detail on All Israel News and here on the Rosenberg Report. Most of the current package of this bill I can accept, but I believe that the current version of the override clause, the one that requires only a simple majority of the Knesset, that is just 61 out of 120 Knesset members, to overturn a Supreme Court decision is very, very dangerous. To pass a final bill like that would be a terrible mistake. It would completely emasculate the High Court. It would remove a critical check and balance and severely damage and possibly destroy Israeli democracy. What's more, it would put all the rights of Israeli minorities, including followers of Jesus, in severe jeopardy. That's why the stakes in this battle are so high. Many Israelis believe that we need a supermajority of 90 out of 120 Knesset members to override an unjust Supreme Court decision. That would mean an override would be possible, but only if it had broad national consensus, not a simple one-vote majority. Look, maybe we could live with only an 80-seat override instead of 61, but I cannot overstate how dangerous 61 would be. It won't simply put my human rights, civil rights, and religious freedom in grave jeopardy, and those of all followers of Jesus, Yeshua in Hebrew. It could very well trigger an outright civil war here in Israel. One more thing. President Biden made a terrible mistake this week by blasting Bibi over judicial reform and saying that he wouldn't invite Israel's prime minister to the White House for meetings. Look, this is White House meddling in internal Israeli affairs. Yeah, this is a big issue, but Biden should be standing with Israel, America's most important ally, not creating daylight between Washington and Jerusalem, especially when he's doing more talking with Iran than he is with Israel and not doing anything to stop the growing Iranian nuclear threat. Well, that is our show for tonight. Please join me in praying without ceasing that God would cool down the social and political temperature here. Please pray that the Lord would grant Prime Minister Netanyahu and opposition leaders, Benny Gantz, Yair Lapid, and others, as well as Israeli President Herzog, true wisdom and courage to forge a good, solid, balanced, and acceptable compromise on judicial reform that protects the human rights and freedoms of all Israelis, including evangelical Christians and Messianic Jews.
Hey, I'm Mati Shoshani, and thank you for watching the TBN Israel YouTube channel. We hope this video gave you greater understanding of Israel and her people. If you haven't already, subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss a video. We'd love to hear from you, so be sure to share what you've learned and ask your questions in comments below. And invite your friends to join the conversation.